public safety. And I want to thank Senator Brad Hoylman, Senator Brian Kavanaugh for their leadership. Let's give them a round of applause. We have two other leaders, and we'll be talking about bills theirs today. Two other leaders who couldn't join us because they're up in the legislature. That's Amy Paulin from the Assembly, as well as Linda Rosenthal, two other champions who've been with us on this fight for a long time. But we're talking about some of their bills as well. Reverend Al Sharpton, I want to thank you for your leadership with the National Action Network, but also the call you gave to me on Saturday that said, tell the people of Buffalo that the National Action Network will cover the cost of their funerals. Kind of hit me hard, that realize, we're going to have funerals because we're all still in shock. But thank you for having the sensitivity to understand that these people are not people of great means. It's a neighborhood, it's a hardworking, family-oriented neighborhood, but that just took a lot of stress out of their lives, and I want to thank you for that. I also want to thank Commissioner Homeland Security and Emergency Services, Jackie Bray, who's been embedded in this from the beginning. She's been extraordinary in her leadership and helping us analyze what happened in our response. So Commissioner Jackie Bray, our Commissioner of the Department of Justice Service, of Criminal Justice Services, Rosanna Rosado, former Secretary of State, and we're so proud of her in that role as a real champion for doing what's right. And having our Superintendent of State Police, Kevin Bruin, I want to thank him, as well as two people who become good friends of mine, Linda Beagle-Schulman and Michael Schulman, who go to too many events where we talk about the loss of life. We also have a representative from our gun safety organization. Let me just open this up here. I want to thank all of them for being here. You'll be hearing from Rebecca in a couple of minutes. I'm going to get through this, but I wanted to show you something that was given to me. This was created by a woman refugee from Burma. It was made in Buffalo, and it says Buffalo. I mentioned this when I was with President Biden yesterday. I said, there's word we made up in Buffalo, combining Buffalo and love. And it was, so I wanted to just share that I'm going to keep this close to me as we get through these difficult days. We're here to talk about a crisis, but before we start, we have to have a moment of silence. We have to reflect on the beautiful lives that were lost, but also the other countless individuals who've also lost their lives to gun violence, because every life matters regardless of how it was taken away from us. So let's have a moment of silence. Thank you. The past few days have been among the most difficult in my life. The hearts of every single New Yorker are literally broken in two, especially Buffalonians. One half grieving for these families that are still bewildered. With President Biden, I had a chance to hold the 3-year-old whose father was in the store buying a cake for his birthday that day. He asked me, "Where's my daddy?" I didn't have an answer. I also met the wife of the security guard, former police officer, who was there because her husband, by his bravery, saved the life of a mother and a 14-year-old by putting himself on top of them. I saw the reunion of that widow and the 2 lives that were spared because of her husband. And those are just 2 examples of all the pain and the sorrow. I spoke about that half of the broken heart that is grieving. But the other half of that heart is filled with anger right now. Because you can't witness what happens to a community like this, or what happens to an 11-year-old in the Bronx, and not feel angry. Otherwise, you're not really human. And in the case of Buffalo, I want to be very clear about what happened. It was a case of an 18-year-old male who was radicalized, and I'm not going to sugarcoat this because there's no way to do that, who was radicalized by white supremacist and white nationalist beliefs And he was so taken by these toxic messages, these racist philosophies that are so easily accessible on social media platforms, or the genesis of which are really being talked about on cable news networks. He was so taken with this that he got in his car after surveillance and visiting the site in the past and drove 3 hours with one goal, and that was to execute black New Yorkers. That's his stated intent. It was his state. He wrote that. That was his intention. So this is white supremacy in this nation at its worst. It's infecting our society. It's infecting our nation. And now it's taken members of our family away. And we have to continue to ask the question, how many more lives need to be needlessly taken from us before we face the truth? And the truth is, the most serious threat we face as a nation is from within. It's not from the Russians. It's not from people elsewhere. It's white supremacism. It's white nationalism. And it's time we confronted it head on. In the last decades, domestic terror attacks and plots have more than tripled in a decade, from about 20 in 2011, to over 73 last year alone. But the hate has not just affected our society and how people think. It's literally been weaponized. Because you can't act on the evil thoughts that have possessed your mind and the hatred that fills your heart if you don't have access to a weapon. That's the intersection of two crises right now that are unfolding in our country. The mainstreaming of hate speech, of racism, nationalism, white supremacy, and the easy access to military-style weapons and magazines. We can no longer look away, and we're not just going to call it out. We need to directly address the deadly threat that it is. And we are. Today, I'm signing an executive order to establish a unit within the Office of Counterterrorism at the Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Services, focusing exclusively on domestic terrorism, first time ever. They'll develop the best practices for law enforcement, for mental health professionals, for school officials to address the rise in homegrown extremism. And we'll make sure that they're trained to know how it occurs, where it occurs, and how to stop it. And to most directly affect this at the local level, we're going to launch a threat assessment management program. And this is going to have multidisciplinary teams in our counties across the state, and they'll identify, assess, and be prepared to deal with the threats. This coordination is critical. It does not exist now. It does not exist. That these stakeholders need to be communicating and sharing information, so guess what? They can start to connect the dots. And that's what we did after 9/11, and that's what we're going to do now. Start connecting the dots. Who heard what? Who saw something? And when you get the law enforcement and the mental health professionals, and in some cases school professionals, actually communicating about what they're seeing, we have a much better opportunity to be in the prevention business instead of just the cleanup business. That's how we need to evolve to. That's how we prevent these crimes from occurring in the first place. I'm now requiring every county in the state of New York and the city of New York to perform a comprehensive review of current strategies and policies and procedures for identifying domestic terror threats. And upon completion, they will develop a plan for confronting the racially and ethnically motivated threats and extremism. And they'll be submitted to our Office of Counterterrorism by the end of the year. We'll work with them. We'll work closely with them. And this executive order will also establish a dedicated domestic terrorism unit within our New York State Intelligence Center, focusing on monitoring social media, because everyone's saying, how was this happen? This information was out there. The footprint, the fingerprint was out there. We are going to ramp up these efforts intensely at our intelligence center, because there's a feeding frenzy going on in social media that hate just breeds more hate. And think about all the people who saw the live stream of the slaughter, the massacre of innocent people in a grocery store, the top store on Jefferson Avenue in Buffalo, New York. They witnessed this in real time. And individuals are using these platforms, and the suspect wanted people to see this. He created an opportunity for people to see this and share what he was doing in his manifesto. So they create platforms so they can share their demented ideas with each other in the hopes that this continues to spread, the virus spreads. And they find others who share their worldview, radicalizing more. And that is a direct threat to New Yorkers. Call it what is, but then have a plan to deal with it. So we're going to ensure that we have the best in the nation cybersecurity teams to monitor the places where radicalization occurs. We're watching you now. We know what you're up to, and we'll be coming after you. But that's only part of the problem. They often find each other because there's algorithms that are out there that elevate hateful, incendiary speech. Can you believe that? There's algorithms in place that ramp up and share this even more with higher frequency than other messages. So this incendiary content is pushed out to more people. In 2022, that's how radicalization is occurring, through the social media echo chamber. And that's why there are 10 fewer people in Buffalo, New York today. These social media platforms have to take responsibility. They must be more vigilant in monitoring the content, and they must be held accountable for favoring engagement over public safety. So today, I'm announcing a referral to the Attorney General's office to investigate the social media platforms that broadcast this horrific attack, that promote and elevate hate speech, and legitimize the replacement theory in the mind of an 18-year-old, a radicalized 18-year-old. I've already spoken to the Attorney General. In fact, she was there with me, with President Biden in Buffalo yesterday, and I thank her for her deep concern and willingness to step up and to take this on. She'll report her findings back to me, and I'll respond as necessary based on those conclusions. Because as I said, domestic terrorism is the most significant threat we face as a state and as a nation. So we're fighting back with a statewide approach, but that's not all. Because, as I mentioned, this intersection where the hateful, evil thoughts in the mind of an 18-year-old can be acted on because of access to guns and massacre people because of the color of their skin, that means something's fundamentally broken. People are wondering how you had the right to acquire a weapon in the first place when you are this individual. We have red flag laws in place to prevent exactly this situation. Red flag, what does that mean? You're waving a red flag. It means, look here, warning, warning, danger. And I traveled the state of New York with many of our partners, the advocates, who are out there every single day, every town, Moms Demand Action. We traveled everywhere. We've been all over the state talking about the red flag bill. We were so proud when that was passed and enacted, and I thank the leadership for working on that. But guess what? They need to be strengthened now. We found a way they need to be made better. So today, I'll be signing an executive order requiring the state police to file an extreme risk order of protection under New York's red flag law when they believe that an individual is a threat to himself, herself, or others. Previously, current law, it's an option to do so. And now it'll be a requirement. And we'll provide law enforcement with the guidance they need, the criteria to follow, and we believe that together these steps are necessary to confront the stem of rising hatred, white supremacism in our state. And we have other ideas. You may have known this. We had actually planned this press conference prior to the Buffalo massacre because we knew that there are areas where our laws need to be bolstered. We're proud of having tough gun laws, no doubt about it. But as time goes on, you start to see the loopholes because the criminals are very, very clever. That's why we had to ban ghost guns. Who would have thought there could be such a thing as a ghost gun, that you could order the parts online and manufacture a lethal weapon in your home? We banned them from the state of New York. So I'm going to continue working over the next few days, because we're coming down to the wire here with the end of session. I want to work closely with the legislature because they have a thoughtful approach to this as well. They are my partners, and I'm going to do that. But I know that there's more we can do. We need to further the red flag law. The executive order will deal with the state police. Working with the legislature, I believe that we can strengthen it at the local level as well, and I offer my hand in partnership to do just that. We're also going to be looking at the role social media platforms play in the incitement of violence, and how that speech, hate speech, is amplified via the algorithms I just mentioned. But in the meantime, the gun violence epidemic, it's overtaken, it's overwhelming our nation. And that came to Buffalo, but it happens everywhere. And we're almost becoming desensitized to the stories because, oh, it's another day and another 9-year-old shot, an 11-year-old killed. I mean, we can't let that happen. We can't let that happen. The reality is there's more guns in this country than there are people. It's too easy for radicalized individuals to go out and acquire these weapons of war. We're not at war. This is not Afghanistan. I've been to Afghanistan. I've seen military-style weapons. I've been on the battlefield. I've seen the use in a military setting. But this is the United States of America. It's not a battlefield. It shouldn't be a battlefield. And in this great country, weapons designed for battlefields should not be used to execute people shopping for groceries or a birthday cake. Yes, we've called upon Washington for a nationwide response. Our advocates know this. Reverend Al knows this. Everybody knows this. It's been a long, long time. But yes, we have the toughest gun laws in our nation, but guess what? The gun the individual purchased in our state was legal. But what happened is that you can go literally across the border to Pennsylvania and buy a magazine with 30 bullets in it. And that's what happened. You can get the base gun here legally in the state of New York, go buy a high-capacity magazine, and just attach it. That's what happened. So, we have to deal with this. And we will. We will. We have announced there is a package of gun laws that we're going to be proposing. We have more guns to deal with. But I want you to know something else that you'll find just shocking. There is another loophole. It's called the AOW. Have you heard of this? It stands for any other weapon. And you're going to be shocked when you see the type of gun that can legally be bought in the state of New York today. Because there's a new category of weapons where the characteristics put them in this gray space between rifles and shotguns and pistols. And they're specifically designed to fall outside the realm of regulation. So they're not subject to our laws. That is how they were created. That is why they exist. Superintendent, would you please show us what an any other weapon looks like? Does anybody think this is a gun? Our laws don't. A gun to be regulated. Our laws don't regulate this. They will now. Thank you, Superintendent. It's concealable, they're high-powered, and they can be modified to have a high-capacity magazine. And currently that's legal. You can go online right now and see manufacturers and sellers describing it as something called a completely legal sawed-off. We banned sawed-off gun weapons, but this says it's completely legal. Not anymore. We are introducing legislation that revises the definition of a firearm to include those weapons, which means we'll be able to charge and prosecute people accordingly. This is just one of those enormous loopholes that you can drive a truck through, similar to what we have with ghost guns. There's another bill, and I want to thank Senator Hoylman and Linda Rosenthal, that requires all semi-automatic pistols sold in New York to be micro-stamped. What does that mean? Where am I? Okay. This is the type of bullet that was used to kill 10 people in Buffalo on Saturday afternoon. Okay. What we don't have is a way to give each of these bullets a unique fingerprint each time the firearm is discharged. It's called micro-stamping when you do that. What does that do? If you have the weapon outfitted to give a unique mark on this when it's discharged, it allows police to trace the bullets and casings that are left behind and link them back to the gun that fired them to help us identify who used the gun and if that gun was used in another crime. That's just common sense. We can do that here in the state of New York. We'll work with our legislature to get that done. Another bill, Amy Paulin, Senator Kavanaugh, thank you. This requires all New York law enforcement agencies to report the recovery of any crime gun to the State Police Clearinghouse within 24 hours. Why 24 hours? According to the manifesto, the perpetrator of the slaughter in Buffalo had planned to go elsewhere in Buffalo. I was in the neighborhood that he was talking about coming down to, and those people were shaken by that too. So we want the second a gun is recovered, the information to be there, enter it into the National Crime Information Center system immediately. And you're probably just as shocked as the rest of us to think that that's not already happening. Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh, for bringing this to our attention. And what will happen is the results of a test fire will go to the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network and determine if it's been used in past crimes. That's how we start catching the perpetrators of the guns that are killing our kids on the streets. It'll go a long way toward our gun tracing efforts to make them more efficient and impactful. And it'll help the Gun Interdiction Task Force that I launched in January to help build on their progress. They have identified so many guns that have come through not just the Iron Pipeline, but we have 9 states. No other state has done this. I took the lead to make sure we have 9 states and the Boston PD as well as the NYPD working with us to make sure that they are attacking this where it's happening. But we're also going to do one more thing, and that's including the permitting and background checks related to specific guns. And we have our plans. I want to work with the legislature on this too. Let's get this done. Let's get this done. I just spoke to the leadership. I know there's a strong interest in being smart about this. So we have more people I want you to hear from. This is just a start, what we're doing here. But right now, communities are in mourning. And I hope to God that this is the wake-up call that this country has needed because we've had other crises. We lost children and a son at Parkland. We lost children at Sandy Hook. We lost people in white supremacist targeted attacks in Charleston, Pittsburgh, El Paso. And I sure didn't want my hometown of Buffalo to ever be on that list. But let that be the city that's known as a place where people said, okay, enough is enough. And they did something. We're doing something. we're doing something right now. That is my promise to New Yorkers. And with that, I want to bring up someone who has held the hands and wept with more victims of shootings and violence across this nation than probably anyone, because he always shows up. He's there where he's needed. And I want to thank Reverend Al Sharpton for being the voice we need at this time. Reverend Al.
Thank you, Governor. Let me say, on tomorrow evening in Buffalo, the clergy has called a rally for healing that I will be the keynote speaker, and then on Friday will be the funeral of Mr. Patterson. I have been invited by the bishop and the widow to speak. When I talked to Governor Hochul last Saturday and told her National Action Network would help to pay for the funerals, it's because of this kind of bigotry, racism, and violence should not be something the victims has to bear alone. This has reached a proportion that is an existential threat to this country. When Homeland Security Mayorkas spoke at our National Action Network convention, he said the biggest domestic threat in this country is white supremacy. But even before white supremacy raised its head in Buffalo, Governor Hochul had said we've got to deal with guns. This was scheduled before what happened in Buffalo. But what happened in Buffalo makes it even more immediate. I guess what stuns me and others in the civil rights community more than anything is there was a time our parents had to run from the Klan, the Ku Klux Klan. But the Klan wore hoods hiding who they were. We're living at a time where bigots live stream and show you who they are and that they're proud to do what they're doing, which is why this executive order that will deal with online radicalizing of white supremacy is so important, because it's making people bold, not even hiding who they are, and want to act as though this is entertainment to shoot down people en masse, innocent people, for no reason. I'm glad to see New York take the first step to deal with threat assessment and to deal with micro-stamping, because we should not let the story end that Buffalo was part of a litany of places that this happened. It should be where New York was the beginning of legislative and policy changes to stop this from happening. They are running around talking about a replacement theory. They marched in Charlottesville saying, "You will not replace me." Well, we may argue that, because none of us are trying to, whether we're black or Jewish or Asian or immigrant or LGBTQ, we are not trying to replace you, but we will disarm you. And that begins with these proclamations. And we must be clear that we stand together on this battle, because we are dying, and we're dying needlessly. We must learn to live together in a safe society, even if we disagree, or we will continue to die apart being foolish. And that's why I wanted to be here today as the governor signs these orders. And I hope it will not only become law with the legislature, which she has raised, I hope it will also nudge nationally for there to be federal laws and enforcement. When you see that weapon she showed that is frightening, that is legal in this state, we need to be able to show a national example. On yesterday, I joined Mr. Greenblatt, Jonathan Greenblatt of the Anti-Defamation League and leaders of LULAC and the Latino community and others calling on the White House to do what we're starting in New York, and that is sit down and deal in a substantive way of how we deal with gun violence. How many Schumann families do we need to have before we stop this and we come together and stop it? 2 weeks after I did the eulogy at George Floyd's funeral, I did the eulogy at a funeral of a 1-year-old kid in Bed-Stuy who died from gang violence. He was playing and got in the way of a bullet guided toward someone else. This is not about just the color, it's about the culture, and it's about what we allow to romanticize and fantasize and then make a reality because they can get these weapons. We must take the tool out of the hands of criminals, out of the hands of bigots and racists. And we cannot say we want to fight white supremacists if we're not going to first disarm them. Yes, we need to teach them better, but you can't teach them until you take the guns out of their hands. And that's what today is all about. We are worse than in the time of the Klan, when people want to live stream doing massacres. And that's why I'm here with the governor today. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor Hochul and Reverend Sharpton. My name is Rebecca Fisher, and I'm the Executive Director of New Yorkers Against Gun Violence. We're a statewide organization that's been advocating for strong, sensible gun policy at the state, local, and federal levels for over 25 years. It's a privilege to be here today to say thank you to Governor Hochul for supporting these critical, life-saving measures to protect New Yorkers. From Buffalo to Brooklyn, from Long Island to the Hudson Valley, our communities, large and small, have come together once again to grieve, to condemn white supremacy and gun violence, to disarm hate, and to demand action. Despite New York's strong gun laws, gun violence is a surging public health crisis in this state and across the country, a crisis that disproportionately impacts our Black and brown communities and other marginalized New Yorkers. During the COVID-19 pandemic, gun sales have spiked and gun violence has surged, nearly doubling since 2019. And while we continue to await strong federal action from Congress, there is more we must do to strengthen New York State's gun laws. And today, Governor Hochul is doing exactly that. The governor's executive actions and legislative proposals will prevent hate-motivated gun violence, mass shootings, suicide and domestic violence, and help address the gun trafficking crisis that's plaguing our communities. Microstamping technology and gun crime data will help solve crimes and also hold rogue gun dealers accountable. As easy access to guns continues to take lives across this country, we are so grateful that right now in New York, we have the leadership to pass gun safety measures that will protect us. Thank you, Governor Hochul, for honoring with action today. I also want to thank the state legislators for their leadership, the community leaders that do the work on the ground every single day, the faith leaders, the Shulman family, and also all of the members of the coalition that have worked hard on this legislation for years, including Everytown for Gun Safety, Moms Demand Action, my partners at Youth Over Guns, the Brady Campaign, the Giffords Law Center, and the Johns Hopkins Gun Violence Solution.
Two on either side. Thank you. Could you just get down a little bit further, Sills?
Get out of the way.
Just want to get my student up here.
This is executive order preventing and responding to domestic terrorism. First one.
We're gonna switch out photos for the second one. Just want to pull this up.
I give you all your nice pens. Thank you, everyone. Be happy to take some questions. I also have my dream team, or part of my dream team, who have been working so hard day and night to help us come up with, in addition to the plans we already had worked to announce this week, some additional ideas that we're working with the legislature. So I want to thank all them. So if there's specific questions for them, they're available as well. Jack?
Governor, regarding legislation, obviously time is running out in the legislative session, just a few days left. Do you feel as though you could get a comprehensive package through? And specifically on red flag, I realize you're limited in the executive order, but what you could do, what kind of legislation would you see to give it more sweeping powers?
Right. What I had control over was the state police, who are state employees. So we directed very clearly to them that it is no longer permissive that when certain criteria or flags are out there, and we'll be very clear in identifying what those are, that they have to take the steps toward getting the extreme risk order of protection. So there is legislation out there to do this already. The legislature has already talked about this, so I'm not saying I feel overly confident. I just feel that there's an interest in the conversations we're having with the legislature. And there's also going to have to be education around this. I mean, clearly we'll be educating the state police to make sure they understand this very well. But they're just one piece of the puzzle. I mean, there will have to be a comprehensive education program for people in a school setting, you know, perhaps more than there has been in the past, as well as mental health professionals. You know, what they, if they're interviewing someone under these circumstances, what are they looking for? How can they tell whether someone is telling the truth or not? And, you know, just trying to, again, using what happened in this case as a model of how we can find ways to make it even better. Yes.
Governor, New York already has so many gun laws. What would make these laws different, and how can New York use the laws that's already on the books?
Well, I think what we pointed out by showing that basically sawed-off shotgun, which has evaded state laws, that we now are going to put that back into being covered. It's not an assault weapon, but it comes under guns such as sawed-off shotguns, which are illegal. So we are, and ghost guns. You know, when the laws were written, no one even dreamed that you could create a gun out of a kit that you order online and make it at home. So we have to be vigilant. I'm more interested in preventing crimes and acts of violence than afterward arresting people and doing the cleanup of it and fixing laws. I want to make sure we're being more proactive. And that is what we're talking about here today with our training, our offices, the data sharing, as well as staying ahead of the criminals who are finding very clever ways to evade state laws. Marcia.
Governor, I wonder what message you're trying to send not only to New Yorkers, but also to the federal government in Washington about the need for getting assault weapons made illegal and not being able to be sold anyplace in this country.
Right. And that's the challenge we face, Marcia. We're proud of the laws we have on the books. We'll continue to enhance them and close loopholes as they become identified. But for the fact that someone can literally drive 10 minutes from their home on the southern border of New York and go into Pennsylvania and legally buy a magazine that can be added to an existing gun to give it the capacity of a military-style machine capable of mass execution. I hope other states are looking at that, because imagine if we had a national response that says, yes, Second Amendment, you have your rights, we're not banning all guns at all, but in these categories that have no legitimate purpose, you ban them, because otherwise they're coming into states that are trying to, what happens, those sales are thwarting our efforts here in the state of New York. And so the message to New Yorkers is, we're going to continue to protect you as New Yorkers and have smart gun safety laws on the books. But we're also going to continue calling on the federal government to respond in a way that they have not in the past. The fact that we don't have federal background check legislation after what happened in Newtown to those first graders, I'm speechless. But let this be yet another call to action, and New York, as always, will lead the way. Yes.
Good afternoon, Governor Hochul. Darla Miles, WABC TV. Two questions, please. First, with the red flag gun law and the now making it a mandatory order for state police to file an IRBO, there's still maybe a gray area with local police, with school officials, with family members, even with the mental health community. Can you talk about perhaps what the plan is looking forward to maybe close those gaps? And in the case of, in this particular case, I know you've directed the Attorney General to maybe to do a deep dive into those social media companies. Will there also be a deep dive into how ERPO failed in this? Because there were a number of individuals. In fact, this afternoon, the Broome County District Attorney, which you may not know because we were in this press conference, announced that he was cleared and then allowed to go back to school after making those threats of murder-suicide. So if you could talk about, maybe closing those other gaps looking forward and what an investigation may be into what happened. And in terms of your investigation with the Attorney General to social media platforms, what could possible criminal or legal action come from that investigation, please?
Okay. Three-part question. Okay. The last part, well, the part you mentioned about the investigation, that is currently under investigation by the federal authorities. So they're looking at exactly what transpired in the case of this individual, who had contact with him, what was done. So we'll be waiting for those results. That is in federal hands where I want it to be. Secondly, with respect to the first question you had, which is how are these other groups, entities, people understand how this law is supposed to function? That is the part I need legislation for. There's a law out there, there's a bill out there that we want to see passed by the Assembly and the Senate, and I'll sign it the second it hits my desk. And I would love for that to be very soon. They're out of session June 2nd. So what that'll also do is not just identify that it becomes mandatory if you see specific signs, but also we do need a major education process. I don't think people understand the purpose of this, how to use it, how not to abuse it. So we have a major job to do in terms of our efforts to make sure everyone who would come in contact with an individual under these circumstances, again, law enforcement, mental health professionals, school settings, and employers, that they understand why this is in place, how we're trying to protect people, and what individuals' rights are within that. So that's on us as well. And with respect to the Attorney General, I'm not going to prejudge what her results of her work will be. I welcome her partnership in this to understand the role of social media in the execution of this execution. There's no other way to describe it. What happened, what were the influences, and what I mentioned earlier was something we can look at we are looking at as well, which is how algorithms can be devised to increase the proliferation of this content, and what my office will be doing. And I'm going to have Commissioner Jackie Bray very involved in this. This office of focusing on domestic terrorism, there may also be opportunities for us to have counter messages embedded in these sites. Think about the possibilities there, where people are going there. You don't know their mindset, but let's say it's just a normal 18-year-old who's never seen this before. The first time they go there, there's something that's attracting them to absorb this and start to believe this and to want to share it. What counter messages can they see at that point of contact, perhaps, that may dissuade them or take them on a different path or let them realize how sinister this is? So that's something we're going to be working on as well, right, Commissioner? Yep. Is there anything else you want to say on that?
No, you covered it.
Okay. So we're going to be very clever. We're going to work on this day and night to use all the resources at the disposal of the state of New York to, again, prevent the next event, not just talk about how we solve for a crime. Yes.
On the red flag executive order, are you concerned that making it mandatory to seek these emergency orders for the state police will create an immense workload for them that they may not necessarily be currently equipped to handle? And then on the state police, is it clear to you whether they checked records to see if the gunman or anyone in his household had any weapons when he went through the mental health check?
Superintendent, is that under investigation at this time, or do we have an answer on that?
I would say that we should not comment on the existing case in terms of that. In terms of what was done at the time, because that's being looked at right now. What I can say is that there was a student who made a threat, a postgraduate threat, and he was taken into custody by a trooper, not arrested, but taken into custody under the mental health law, and brought to a mental health facility for evaluation. In terms of the workload. Pardon. In terms of the workload, we're going to get it done. You know, when the governor asks us, the state police, to do something, we're going to do it. So we'll make it happen in terms of the EPRO mandate. And we apply for a large number of them anyway. But now, with this clear direction, we're going to do it every time.
Just so they understand the scale, Superintendent, is it approximately 800 were applied for in the past? Mike, could you know?
They vary from agency to agency. I think we've applied for around 300, and I think there's around 1,200 statewide. That's just my memory. Those are what's known as the red flag, EPRO orders.
1,300, how many?
I believe we don't necessarily track all the ones we've applied for. We track the ones granted, and so the state police have been granted 300. I believe the statewide number is close to 1,800, or a little lower, maybe 1,300. But those are ones granted. The courts don't necessarily have to grant them, and we don't have a present means for capturing applications that aren't granted by the court.
How long the red flag is in place once the order has been granted? How long is it in effect?
1 year.
1 year. And there's two different levels of scrutiny by a judge. The first level is to determine whether or not determine whether there's guns in a home where someone has triggered the red flag. And then also, if you're going to have those guns removed or the person cannot purchase a gun, you can apply for a 1-year order that's renewable. And the standard for the first year is
temporary order.
Yeah, clear and convincing.
Temporary order is probable cause.
Okay. All right. The temporary order is that a judge has to determine that there's probable cause that such person would have access to a weapon and to use it to do harm to themselves or others, and to have a longer implementation of the red flag law, which is to suspend their ability to access guns. It's a clear and convincing evidence. So it's a higher standard in place. So that's all at the judge level. That's ones to deter. So we're talking about the determinations that's made at the first point of entry, whether it's state police or whether it's a mental health professional or it's someone in the school. And we're going to be very clear on what they're supposed to be examining, what factors so there's no question as to what should be done in an individual circumstance. To answer Luis's original question, which is, was it done in this case? We're going to find out what happened there, but I will always say there's a better way to do it. There should be more clarity around this, and that's what we're going to be striving to accomplish now. Yes.
Governor, today Congressman Suozzi accused you of not coming at this issue from a genuine place, citing comments you made about your NRA rating while running for Congress and saying you could have done more to educate on the red flag law. Do you feel that there's anything more you could have done throughout your political career here?
You're asking a question of me from a political opponent at an event where we're talking about people who've lost their lives due to white behavior. In Buffalo, New York, but what is happening every single day in the streets of places like Rochester, Syracuse, Brooklyn, the Bronx, Harlem, and everywhere else, where I have gone for 8 years as lieutenant governor to countless funerals. I went all over the state of New York in a bus championing the red flag law with the individuals, the advocates you saw right here. I have made this my calling because too many lives have been lost. And I'll continue to make sure that New York State leads on this and be an example to other states and hopefully to shame the federal government into doing what they should have done years ago.
Speaking of Congressman Suozzi, he was also kept hammering bail reform, I think during that news conference. I was wondering if you have a reaction to that, where you think bail reform fits into the broader gun violence question. And then totally separately, I was wondering if you might have any update on when Antonio Delgado will be leaving Congress and any update.
Interesting questions. I assure you, I'm not paying attention to accusations or any other messaging, however it's conveyed by someone running for office. This is not a time for politics. And if people don't realize that, well, I'll let the media judge, and everyone else can judge the propriety of having those attacks that are absolutely unrelated to what happened here. I won't even comment any further. With respect to my Lieutenant Governor designee, who was with me in Buffalo yesterday as we greeted President Biden, we are working on the timing, the proper transition from his responsibilities as a member of Congress to a step into this role. There's a lot of staffing issues, a lot of unfinished business. I want to make sure that he's able to continue for his constituents. But I'm looking forward to making an announcement, hopefully literally in a matter of days, as to the day that he'll be sworn in as Lieutenant Governor. And I'm really looking forward to it. We're going to be great partners. He is an extraordinary leader already, and I'm really proud that he's going to be the next elected Lieutenant Governor of the state of New York.
Yeah, hi, Governor Roger Stern from 1010 Wins. As you yourself alluded to, we have a porous border. After other shootings of this type, many well-meaning government leaders have talked about reforms they want to get done, but the shootings continue. What do you say to people, who certainly appreciate your sincerity, but are cynical that things are going to change this time, that things will indeed change this time?
I will talk about what I have control over. I can't control people's cynicism. I understand it. I truly do. But they will see how I lead through this. And it's not about running out and scoring political points. It's about doing whatever we can, working with a team of really smart people and legislators and figuring out, is there any area we can do better? Is there a law that's being evaded or thwarted by the criminals? When you saw that with that sawed-off shotgun that they call a legal sawed-off shotgun, if that's not an oxymoron, I don't know what is, because it's not legal. We found that. We found ghost guns. You can no longer purchase a ghost gun in the state of New York. So we're making real changes, in addition to what we're doing with this absolutely ramped up effort to say that we as a state have a responsibility. I can't wait for the feds to get this done. My own state is going to lead in the surveillance of the social media hate crime, hate speech that's out there, and find out whether or not it is going to ultimately be weaponized so we can prevent the next mass shooting. So the public will never know the mass shooting that we prevent, but I'll know. I'll know. And in my heart, I'll know we've done everything we can as leaders in this state, and I hope the rest of the nation is watching what we're doing right here in the state of New York, because I'm very proud of it. Thank you, everyone.